When Craig Kimbrell just kind of lost it, the Orioles needed a closer, and they turned to a trade deadline acquisition in Seranthony Domínguez, and he pitched pretty well in that role. But the question now is, do the Orioles bring him back for one more year? And if so, where does he pitch in this Orioles bullpen next season? We'll review the 2 months of Domínguez in Baltimore coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, October 24th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are continuing our Orioles 2024 player season review series. As today, we will talk about a guy who did not spend his entire season with the Baltimore Orioles, but a guy who could play a big factor on the team next year. That is Seranthony Domínguez, who the Orioles acquired in a trade with the Philadelphia Phillies at the deadline to help their bullpen. Ended up being the closer for the good chunk of the final 2 months of the year, and really did pitch well in the postseason as well. And definitely a guy who I think is in the bullpen plans for 2025. We'll talk about what went right with Domínguez, what went wrong, and his biggest storyline heading into the offseason. And that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So today's episode continues our series of player season reviews for the O's. Make sure to check out some of the other reviews that we did this week. If you go back to Monday's episode, we talked about James McCann. Should the Orioles bring him back to be the backup catcher again next year? Tuesday, we chatted about Jorge Mateo, an injury-shortened season. What are his chances of making the roster next season? And then yesterday's episode, we kind of did the Orioles fans guide to watching and previewing this Dodgers-Yankees World Series. Of course, check out all the content. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen, Apple, Spotify, wherever it may be. And of course, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Would appreciate it greatly. Let's talk Seranthony Domínguez, though, and his 2 months in Baltimore. Now, Domínguez did not start the season with the Orioles. He started it with the Philadelphia Phillies, the only team he had known after debuting with the Phillies and having a great year in their bullpen as a 23-year-old in 2018. He stuck with the Phillies throughout that, and it was a big part of that World Series run in 2022 for Philadelphia. He struggled a bit in 23, struggled even more in the first half of the season this year, and the Phillies felt like he was expendable. The Orioles were looking for bullpen arms. The Phillies were looking for right-handed hitted outfield bats. And they kind of made an interesting swap. It was Austin Hayes for Seranthony Domínguez. Now, the Orioles also got outfielder Christian Pache in that deal, but he only stuck around with the O's for about a week. It was really a Hayes for Domínguez deal, and it did fill a hole for both teams. And honestly, I would say through the first 2 months, now, theoretically, each team has the player for the entire 2025 season as well, so we'll see after that happens. But I would argue the Orioles won the trade. I mean, the Orioles got a new closer. They maybe didn't think they needed at that point, but certainly did down the stretch. And a guy who I think could be a big part of their bullpen next year. And for Hayes, he was injured. He got sick. He didn't really produce when he was on the field with the Phillies. I mean, the Orioles got more out of Domínguez than the Phillies did get out of Hayes, at least for the final 2 months of this season. But when Domínguez came over, he had thrown 36 innings to a 4.75 ERA. With the Phillies, good strikeout stuff, 26%. Walk rate was, one of the lowest, actually the lowest number of his career at 7.6%. And he came over to Baltimore and he changed things a little bit, but overall he pitched better for the Orioles than he did for the Phillies. He appeared in 25 games for the O's, 22 2/3 innings out of the bullpen. Domínguez had a 3.97 ERA in Baltimore, 29% strikeout rate with a 9% walk rate. Opponents hit 225 against the right-hander, had a really good strand rate, left 92.2% of runners on base. That's among guys that he came in and inherited when he came out of the bullpen, which was pretty impressive. had a bit of a home run problem, which he was kind of already having in Philadelphia earlier in the year, which definitely hurt him, gave up 5 homers. But he kind of became the closer for the O's and was 10 for 11 in save opportunities after the Orioles put him into that role when Craig Kimbrell was really starting to go downhill. So let's start with what went right for Dominguez. And that was really the first thing. He provided at least some stability to the closer role for the Orioles. I mean, right around that trade deadline when the Orioles made the deal for Dominguez, and this is a guy who had closing experience in his rookie year with the Phillies in 2018. He had 16 saves. He had 9 saves in 2022. He had a couple more each of the last 2 seasons with the Phillies as well. So he had been a closer. Now, he was kind of a closer on a bad team when he first came up with Philly, but at the very least had been a high leverage reliever for a long time and knew how to pitch in those big situations. But he had kind of come out of that role for Philadelphia, and that was one of the reasons why they felt he was expendable. He was still in their bullpen pitching innings, but he was more of a 6th inning guy than an 8th inning guy. And he wasn't in the immediate Rob Thompson circle of trust at the time of the trade deadline. And that's why they found him expendable. But the Orioles kind of put him right into that circle again. He went 10 for 11 in saves, and he certainly wasn't perfect, but it was so much better than what the Orioles were getting from Craig Kimbrell at that point. I mean, you think back to the trade deadline, that was right around when the true collapse really started happening for Kimbrell. Like, he was showing some signs up to that point, right after the All-Star break where he wasn't pitching super well. But right before the trade was the true collapse. Actually, funny enough, the day before the Orioles made the deal to get Dominguez was that game where the Orioles had, they played that terrible series in Miami. They had lost the first 2 games against the Marlins. Jorge Mateo had suffered that gruesome elbow injury. And in game 3, they looked like, all right, we're going to avoid the sweep. They had a 3-run lead going into the 9th. It was like, Kimbrell's been pitching poorly, but it's a 3-run lead against the Marlins. Perfect time to get him right. And Kimbrell just fell apart, gave up 3 runs in the 9th and blew the save. Luckily, the Orioles scored and won the game in the 10th inning there in Miami to avoid the sweep. And then the very next day against the Padres, actually the day that Dominguez was acquired, he was acquired in the morning, and the Orioles played that night against the Padres. Kimbrell came in a tie game in the top of the 9th and gave up a 2-run homer to Jerks and Profar that ended up being the finishing blow for that Padres win over the O's. And that was kind of the peak of the Kimbrell collapse where he kind of lost the closer role. It was funny to see it happen the day they acquired Dominguez. And it was like a week or so later where the O's just decided, you know what? Not only is Seranthony Dominguez a high leverage guy, he's going to be our closer. And he came in, and one of the other reasons why he got that closer job so quickly, it wasn't just because, okay, he was on the team and he had some closing experience. He made a really good first impression. He came in August and 12 innings, 8 hits, 5 runs, 15 Ks to 4 strikeouts. He didn't allow a hit against his sinker. They hit just 183 against the 4-seam fastball. And in his first 8 outings with the Orioles, Dominguez allowed only 1 run and had 11 strikeouts to just 3 walks. So you can imagine, Brandon Hyde and Drew French and that team getting together and being like, look, Craig Kimbrell cannot be our closer anymore. We've got a guy in Dominguez who has closed games and is probably pitching better than any other reliever right now, and just said, you know what, let's put him in the role. And again, it worked. Like, he wasn't incredible, but after what you were getting from Craig Kimbrell, him going 10 for 11 in save opportunities was huge. Just kind of keep this Orioles team from completely falling apart at the seams down the stretch. And the other thing that went well for Dominguez is just that, like, his stuff is just really, really good. And that's why the Orioles targeted him, despite the fact that, as I mentioned, he hadn't had good numbers. He had almost a 5 ERA with the Phillies throughout the season. He had finished really poorly for the Phillies in 2023. So you kind of didn't know what you were going to get out of him, but you see the stuff that he comes over with. You see the 98-mile-per-hour fastballs. You see the devastating slider, and you're like, this is a guy who's been good before. And, it's not like he's old. He's 29 years old when you bring him in. And you see someone who can help your bullpen. And that is what he did. Immediately, Dominguez came over and had the highest velocity of anyone in the Oriole bullpen. Now, that's going to change next year when Felix Bautista is healthy and ready to go. But without Felix, the Orioles didn't have that big velocity. Actually, they also acquired Gregory Soto at the deadline as well, who we'll talk about probably next week. They came in and they became 1-2 in the Orioles bullpen in terms of average fastball velocity. Dominguez came in there averaging 98.5 miles per hour on his sinker, 98.1 miles per hour on his 4-seamer, And those were both tops in the Orioles bullpen. And obviously there is much more that goes into being a good pitcher than velocity, but especially when you are a one-inning guy out of the bullpen, fastball velocity means a lot for what you can do. And the O's just didn't have a guy who could really hit 100. And that is something Dominguez could come in and do out of the pen, which is sometimes just nice to see. And he had that slider that he threw a lot, 35+% whiff rates with him. And, he doesn't really allow much hard contact. He's kind of an interesting pitcher where he had a little bit of a home run problem, but it wasn't because he gets smashed all the time. Like Craig Kimbrell had a home run problem for a lot of reasons this year, but one of the reasons is Kimbrell had been so good at missing bats his whole career, but when Kimbrell would get hit, he gets hit hard. It's just that he had a, borderline Hall of Fame career so far is because he avoided getting hit. His stuff was just so good, especially in his younger years. He would get so many swings and misses. Dominguez gets some whiffs, but he only had a hard hit rate against him of 32.9% this year. That is in the 90th percentile of MLB pitchers. That is really, really good at avoiding hard contact. But it's like whenever he gives up a ball in the air, it just ends up being a homer because he also had a home run problem. It's a really interesting mix there where, he's not getting hit hard in general, but when he does, the ball just seems to fly over the fence at the worst times. But that's kind of something you can invest in a little bit because you're saying, hey, maybe he just has really bad home run luck. You're taking him from a hitter's ballpark in Philadelphia to, with the Wall move back, much more of a pitcher's ballpark, at least in terms of home runs in Baltimore, which at least they thought would help some as well. And it did, and it didn't. And we'll get to that coming up next. But I think the interesting thing also was the Orioles kind of tried to reintroduce his changeup a little bit. When he got to the O's, he was basically four-seam sinker slider with the Phillies, but a changeup was a pitch he had thrown in the past. Now listen, he threw 22 and 2/3 innings with the Orioles. He threw 5 changeups. So I'm not saying they completely reintroduced it, but in the previous 3 months, he had thrown 0 changeups with the Phillies. So at least it was something he was trying. And I think it's an intriguing pitch for him that he might need at times to get left-handed hitters out because in his career, now not this year overall with the Phillies and O's, he was pretty good against lefties, but in his career, he's been much better against right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters because he relies on his slider and lefties see that pitch a whole lot better. That is why I think he's still going to need that changeup long-term. But what was kind of intriguing with Dominguez is, you broke down his season in terms of how he did with the Phillies and then how he did with this Orioles team. He was so good for the O's in August, as I talked about. That's because he gave up just 1 hit on his slider to lefties in August. That's a pitch that they can hit a little bit sometimes. Just 1 hit to lefties. In September, the lefties were all over his slider once again. So it's very, very interesting to see as his slider goes, really he goes against both righties and lefties. I mean, he dominated righties with the slider all year. He had like a 62% or something like that whiff percentage in September against righties with that slider. They just can't touch it when he locates it well. But if he could add that changeup, I think he has another level, and it's something at the very least you could tell, okay, he wasn't throwing it for 3 months, and he tossed it in here and there. The Orioles probably at least came to him after the trade and said, look, you don't have to throw it 10% of the time at this point, but we like your changeup. And if the O's do bring him back, which we'll talk about as well, I would not be surprised if he mixes in that changeup much more against lefties when we see him on the mound next year. But it wasn't all amazing stuff. There was a little bit of an iffy finish for Dominguez, and there was also kind of a home run issue as well. We'll talk about what went wrong for Seranthony Dominguez with the Orioles coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. FanDuel, they've got everything right there for you to just make it easy. They make the app easy to use, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is when you place your first $5 bet. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Now you go on the FanDuel app and you're thinking, okay, these Ravens, this offense can't be stopped. They've won 5 in a row. They're taking on a terrible Browns team. The Ravens are 9.5-point road favorites on FanDuel I'm still taking the Ravens right there. And you can do so as well at FanDuel.com. So for everything Seranthony Domínguez did well for the Orioles right after the trade in August, he kind of didn't pitch super well in September. In the month of September, 7 2/3 innings for the O's, 10 hits, 5 runs, 9 strikeouts to 5 walks in that stretch. And that was really the one big thing that went wrong for Seranthony Domínguez in Baltimore this year. Just didn't finish the regular season super strong. And if you break it down even further to his final 6 outings of the regular season, Domínguez pitched just 4 1/3 innings, allowed 5 runs on 7 hits with 3 strikeouts to 5 walks and a home run. He had 2 multi-run outings in that stretch. He had his only multi-walk outing in that stretch as well with the Orioles, and that was his only blown save. If you remember this game, I'm sure you do, where the Orioles were just struggling mightily, had lost those first 2 games at home against the Giants, and they finally got a lead in that day game, game 3, and Domínguez comes out there with a 1-run lead in the 9th and walks the first 2 batters, and then there's that crazy fly ball into right center field that ends up tying the game. Luckily, the O's got out of that inning, and then you know what happened next. Anthony Santander hit the 2-run walk-off homer to give the Orioles the win in the bottom of the 9th. But that was his only blown save, and that was because he walked 2 batters. And that was the thing, walks have been a bit of an issue during his time with the Phillies, but early on in his tenure with the O's, he just wasn't walking guys. And even though he was giving up some homers, when they're just solo shots, you can get by with that. Even as a reliever, you can get by less with solo home runs, but he wasn't getting hit super hard. He was kind of getting a little unlucky. And it really did feel like he was rolling along until the end of the year. And it was funny because he came in and almost immediately took the closer role from Craig Kimbrell, because Kimbrell was awful and Domínguez was just pitching better and better. And then we got into September and it felt like, 20 of the 26 players on the Orioles roster were struggling at that point. And he just started to struggle a little bit as well. And he kind of took and then also lost the closer role. Like, if you remember back to that game against the Giants, when he blew the save in the top of the 9th, Gregory Soto actually came in and induced a huge double play to get out of that inning and keep the game tied, and allowed Santander to walk it off in the bottom half. But we kind of felt like at that point that maybe Gregory Soto would be the closer moving forward. Now, Domínguez still did get at least one more save opportunity. I know he got one in the Yankees series in the Bronx and closed out the game in which the Orioles finally clinched their playoff spot in New York. So that was good to see. Got a couple of big outs, but he didn't even get the full 9th inning. Like, Brandon Hyde mixed and matched. Gregory Soto got an out in the 9th, and then he went to Domínguez. So it kind of felt like by the end of the season, Domínguez was still in Hyde's circle of trust. And you could tell that because he pitched in relief in both of those close wildcard games and pitched well. But he wasn't even the closer. The Orioles, I think, and I talked about this when I previewed the wildcard series going into the postseason, the O's didn't have a set closer at that point. It was just like whoever the matchups fit, whether it was Coulomb, Webb, Soto, Domínguez, Cano, like any of these guys could close out the game if the matchups were right, and he kind of fell back into that category. Now, the good thing was that although he did not finish very strong in the regular season, Hyde went to him in both playoff games. Remember, he came in the 9th inning in game 1 and was able to finish that thing off to keep it 1-0. And then he pitched well in game 2. He retired all 5 batters he faced across those 2 playoff games and recorded 2 strikeouts as well. Looked really, really good. And he was part of that entire Orioles playoff run where the pitchers were amazing. And of course, the hitters did nothing. And that's why the O's were swept by the Royals. But Domínguez looked really good and really comfortable. And that was one of the other things that we had talked about when Seranthony Domínguez was acquired by the Orioles in the first place, in that, yeah, he was struggling. Again, I talked about the great stuff that he had, but he was certainly struggling with the Phillies shortly before that trade. And it was like, why are you going to get a guy who seems to be on the downswing? Well, we talked about how the stuff was still really good. And we also talked about how good he had been in the postseason. You combine those 2 scoreless outings with the Orioles, Domínguez now in his playoff career, 17 2/3 innings of work, mostly with the Phillies and then these 2 games with the Orioles. He has allowed in that stretch just 2 earned runs on 13 hits with 27 strikeouts to 4 walks and 0 home runs. That is a 1.02 postseason career ERA for Seranthony Domínguez. That is kind of absurd how good he's been for a reliever. I mean, almost 18 innings is a pretty good sample size in the postseason for a one inning guy. That's absurd how good he's been in the playoffs. And he showed it again. So at the very least, you had a guy there who had been there, done that, and it kind of showed, right? He had no nerves going into those 2 playoff games, and he pitched super well to keep those games close, which was certainly awesome to see. But the other thing to talk about is that went wrong for Dominguez in 2024 with the O's is that the home runs and the walks really did not go away. Now, still with the Orioles, he kind of finished with the lowest walk rate of his career, which was certainly good to see. But the home runs, it was interesting where they got him. I mentioned how he wasn't walking guys in the month of August, but he was giving up homers. He gave up 5 homers in August. Now, because he wasn't walking guys, all 5 home runs were solo shots, and most of them didn't really hurt him because he wasn't protecting a lot of one-run leads, and he could get away with giving up those solo home runs. Then in September, he gave up just 1 home run, but the walks became an issue then. So luckily, and the thing was with the Phillies near the end, he was combining both. He was walking and giving up homers. Luckily with the O's, he started by giving up homers, no walks. Then he flipped, okay, no homers, but I'm going to give up walks. You can survive a whole career like that. Now, if you do them both together, that's when you get in a whole lot of trouble. But that home run rate is not going to hold up. You don't want a 15.6% home run to fly ball rate, which is what Dominguez had in his total 58 2/3 innings this year between the Orioles and the Phillies. You would like to bring that down a little bit. Now, a ballpark that's going to help you a little bit more in Baltimore, at least against righties, but still, home runs make you nervous, especially as a reliever because they can change the game late. Didn't really hurt Dominguez this year, but something to keep an eye on if the Orioles are going to bring him back for next year. And that is the final topic to get to here. Dominguez is not technically a free agent. The Orioles kind of have the choice whether or not he's going to become a free agent. And we'll talk about what choice the Orioles should make. That's coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Now, yeah, we can't buy Orioles World Series tickets right now. They're out. But if you still do want to go to New York or go to LA, you can go to Game Time and use the flash deals to save even more. Use Game Time picks. Their curation makes it easier to save more on tickets. Use the all-in pricing. You turn on this feature, shows you the totals up front. That means no surprise fees at checkout. And listen, you want to get MLB tickets. I get it. But we're in the Orioles offseason. Concerts, comedy, theater, they got it all at Game Time as well. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we finish our Seranthony Dominguez Orioles season review in 2024 with what's his 25 going to look like. As I mentioned, Dominguez 29, who actually turned 30 in November, and the Orioles traded for him knowing that they could have him back for one more season in 2025. He has a club option for 2025. What that means is the Orioles have the decision on whether or not to bring him back for a set price. The club option is $8 million, which means the O's have 2 choices to make, and they will make this choice within 5 days after the World Series ends. Either A, they pick up the club option, which means Dominguez comes back, they pay him $8 million for next year, and then he becomes a free agent after next season, or they decline the club option, which means he just immediately becomes a free agent this offseason. I'm pretty convinced, especially with David Rubenstein at the helm, that the Orioles are going to pick up that $8 million club option for Dominguez and bring him back to the bullpen in 2025. And I kind of think it's a no-brainer. Like, you think about who Brandon Hyde was going to in the postseason, the fact that he used Dominguez in both games, like, he was clearly top 3 in terms of Brandon Hyde's personal bullpen trust rankings as the Orioles entered October. And even with getting Felix Bautista back next year, there is still going to be questions about this Oriole bullpen, questions about the pitching staff as a whole. If they don't bring back Burns, you got Bradish and Wells, who are still going to miss a lot of time after their elbow surgeries. Like, there is questions for this pitching staff. Seranthony Domínguez might not be the pitcher he was a couple of years ago with Philadelphia, but the stuff is still really good. He still gets guys out. He got 10 saves for you last year. He was closing out games. If Felix isn't quite right the whole year, you can turn to him. I just think for $8 million, and good relievers go for more than that on the free agent market as well, I think it's a no-brainer to bring Dominguez back. And again, if he's really bad for some reason, it's only $8 million, and either way, he's a free agent after 2025. So you're not tied down for multiple years after this if he starts to pitch poorly. I just think he'll be good enough to warrant potentially even more than $8 million. So I'm absolutely in on an $8 million team option. Again, I think this is a no-brainer for the Orioles to pick up. So then you look at that and you say, okay, where does he fit in this Oriole bullpen? Now, everything we've heard from the O's is that Felix Bautista is going to be a full go in spring training, ready for opening day, ready to be the Orioles closer in 2025. And man, did we miss Felix Bautista this year. And you don't know if he's going to be exactly the dominant all-star version of Bautista we saw 2 years ago. That's still a question that has to be answered. And honestly, it might take a month or two into next season to truly know if he's fully back to what he was. In the meantime, having a guy in Dominguez who has closed for you last year, has closer experience, has good stuff to step in and fill in the role at times if you need to, would be huge for this bullpen, especially a veteran. And again, a 1.02 ERA in 18 innings in the postseason. Like, that's good stuff to have on this team. So I think really the role would be another setup guy, kind of along with Yennier Cano to be a setup man to get the ball to Bautista. And right now, and again, this is without any outside additions. And I do think the Orioles should maybe bring in one veteran reliever in free agency to add to this bullpen. But if they don't, here would be the projected bullpen for next year. Felix Bautista as your closer. Then I would call Seranthony Domínguez, Gregory Soto, and Yennier Cano kind of your top leverage men. Then your other lefties would be Cionel Perez, Danny Coulomb, and I think Keegan Aiken would be kind of your long guy. And then at this point, I would give Jacob Webb that final spot in the bullpen. But again, there are other guys who would certainly be vying for one of those other bullpen roles. Now, what I will say is all these guys have pitched so much, and you had Webb deal with some injuries. You had Coulomb deal with injuries. You had Cano even deal with that forearm injury down the stretch. You have Bautista coming off Tommy John. You are bound to, because of injuries, just not have one or two or even more of these guys going into next season. That's where the depth comes in. That's where your Matt Bowmans, your Colin Selby's, your Brian Baker's, your Nick Vespies, and whomever could come in and play a role in that bullpen, certainly. But that's kind of why I think they should bring in one more veteran. But that doesn't mean don't bring back Dominguez. I think Dominguez has a role in this bullpen right now. Like, let me know in the Locked On Orioles YouTube comments here what you think Dominguez's role should be. Like, do you think the O's should pick up that $8 million option? I think it's a no-brainer, but I want to know your thoughts. And where do you think he falls in? Because I think we're all hoping and thinking Felix goes right back into that closer role. But then where on that hierarchy, if you had to ask right now, if you were given those 8 relievers that I said could make the team, Bautista, Dominguez, Soto, Perez, Coulomb, Webb, Cano, and Aiken, where would you put Dominguez on there right now? Right now, if you're saying Bautista's 1, and it's hard to say that because you don't know what he's going to be, but he's so good that Bautista's my 1, you can make an argument for Dominguez to be 2. And I think he would be no lower than 4 on that list. And for me, that's why I'm absolutely bringing him back, at least to start the year, giving him a high leverage role in this Oriole bullpen. The stuff is good. Mostly the production was good. I think that was a good trade for the Orioles. I think it was a win-win. Hayes for Dominguez wasn't the most major trade of all time, but I think it was a good move that the Orioles made to go and get bullpen help in Seranthony Dominguez, and a guy who, again, can come back for one more year. That's always super valuable as well. That'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with one more episode this week, a little Friday pod. Might just do some Orioles news and notes, maybe answer some mailbag questions as well. We got some news. Brian Ebel, who's been with this organization basically forever, will not be returning as head athletic trainer for the Orioles next year. We'll discuss that. We'll talk a little bit about some more minor moves and things going on around baseball and some former Orioles in the World Series and all that good stuff coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.